and let me just again welcome you to the summit. What a joy it is to have you here. It seems like we come back every year, and there's just this refreshing spirit of joy and unity among us. And it's really a precious time, so I hope that your hearts are encouraged. We know at ADF that there is not one organization that can protect our cherished freedoms. We also know that it takes a movement with many coordinated parts, and the people in this room play a major role in protecting freedom, not just here in the United States, but around the world. So my prayer is that no matter what vocation or what area, what geographical region God has called you to serve in, that this week would be refreshing to you and invigorating for you as you continue to contend for truth. So we're excited to have you and to host you. 30 years ago, Catholic philosopher Michael Novak reflected on the 20th century, history's bloodiest, a century marked by gas chambers, gulags, and Orwellian slogans that were really masking tyranny. Among that century's greatest lessons, he observed, is that truth is a liberating master. In obeying the evidence of truth, he said, no human being is humiliated. Rather, he is in that way alone ennobled. In obeying truth, we find the way of liberty marked out as a lamp unto our feet. To me, those words ring louder each year as our world continues to experience the painful consequences of what it means to reject truth, whether it's the haunting ache of a child that has been lost to abortion, the scars on a teenager who was told she was born in the wrong body, or the longings of a child who has been intentionally deprived of both a loving mother and father. We are living in a brave new world, and in that brave new world, lies leave no soul untouched. And when they make their way into law, we know that those harms only multiply. But the good news today is that truth is stubborn. Like a balloon that we hold underwater, truth can only be suppressed by constant, deliberate effort. And the more time elapses, the more that truth is suppressed, the harder it becomes to hide it. Because you see, God promises that he upholds creation. His truth endures even when we're faithless. He is faithful. And this is the rock that is the foundation of our work. It must be the foundation of our work. It means that truths that are once lost can still be reclaimed, recovered. And we are called to do that in this moment, in season and out. So this week, we are going to be reminded of the battles that we have ahead, even as we thank the Lord for how far he's brought us. And when we remember his faithfulness, it fuels our endurance for what lies ahead. When I first came to ADF 12 years ago, the leftward march of American law was well underway, both in our culture and in our legal system. And we know that Roe versus Wade was deeply entrenched in the minds of Americans and in the legal system. We had individuals like Jack Phillips, Barronelle Stutzman, Chief Cochran, the Little Sisters of the Poor, all who were targeted by their government. And we had states that were redefining marriage as the Obama administration refused to defend it. And then, of course, we had the seismic Obergefell decision. And for those in the law, we knew it was coming, but I don't know we quite anticipated the changes that would soon result because of it. 10 years later, we can still feel the aftershocks. It didn't just redefine marriage in the law. It reshaped the moral imagination in hearts, minds, and souls. And immediately on its heels, without even missing a beat, came the trans movement, which Time magazine boldly declared at the time to be the next civil rights frontier. I want to take you back to those days for a minute because it's easy to forget. They were lonely moments. The West had begun to view Christians and Christianity and morality with suspicion and even contempt, and truth fell out of favor. And in those moments, some fell silent, others drifted, unwilling to stand when it mattered the most. Those who dared to speak or to essentially say, no, I won't affirm this new ideology, suffered real consequences, tangible consequences. But that wasn't the whole story. God raised up in that moment voices of courage, of conviction, of fidelity to the truth, those who would walk boldly into the wind, even when it cost. In 2016, do you remember when North Carolina dared to protect women's privacy in restrooms? I do, thanks to the courage of so many, including our friends Tammy Fitzgerald and John Rustin, who are in this room today. They stood in that moment when activists made the state a pariah. Do you remember the boycotts? Do you remember when the NCAA pulled its championship games to punish North Carolina for standing for women and girls? It had quite a chilling effect then. It was a bit bewildering, and it actually still has a chilling effect there. But that was just the beginning of the long game. You see, when the Obama administration then ordered public schools to let boys and girls share private spaces, it was state attorneys general that boldly stood up in that moment and got the rule enjoined. And when school districts began to open up private spaces to the opposite sex, they never anticipated moms and dads and attorneys from places like the Independence Law Center and other organizations that are also here in this room to rise up and to stand and continue to meet that challenge, even when they faced losses. Or when they said the science was on the other side, the science was supporting something we knew to be a false ideology. We saw experts stand up, men like Dr. Alan Josephson in that moment, a leading psychiatrist in his field. He dared to speak out against puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and surgeries and said, let's talk to kids first. He lost his job, but he also recognized what was at stake, and not just for children, but for free and open debate. And he stood and he continued to stand for year after year after year after year. But his courage paved the way for other people, for teachers, for nurses, for students, for doctors like Etan Heim. We heard about him last night. You may remember that last year at the summit, he exposed the illegal gender transitions that were happening at the Texas Children's Hospital. This young, fresh face that had just come out of medical school, launching a career. Imagine that, having the force of the federal government, the president's administration, target you and face you with the consequences of not just financial ruin, but of substantial prison time. He didn't have the funds to pay for a defense. He didn't know what to do in the moment. But this alliance stood firm with allied attorneys and with you supporting his case until the Trump administration came in and dropped those charges. And while I know it's great to talk about women's sports right now, it certainly is a political winner. But that has not always been the case. And I want to remind you of that. 8 years ago, there were 2 boys in Connecticut who began competing as girls. 3 weeks earlier, they were competing as boys. And in just a 2-year period, from 2017 to 2019, they took 15 state track championships from 9 different girls and displaced girls over 85 times. We were privileged to stand with Chelsea, Alana, and Selena, who filed the nation's first legal challenge to protect women's sports. But I want to remind you that they asked their principals, they asked their coaches, they asked their athletic directors, they asked women's groups, they asked their school sports association, the PTA, they asked female professional athletes, and so many others to stand and to help them. And they got the same answer, again and again. No, sit down, be quiet, don't say anything. You're a transphobe, you're a bigot. How dare you? But they had strong parents who helped put steel in their spine, and they stood. They wouldn't allow their voices to be silenced, and they realized that someone has to go first when contending for truth. And so with great courage and for a significant period of time, years on end, even today, they continue to stand alone. And then more voices joined. It's been a rising chorus of female athletes that are turning the hearts and the conscience of this nation back to the truth. They've inspired 27 states now to enact women's sports laws, which so many of you in this room have played pivotal roles in writing, in defending, and testifying in advance of. And we're privileged to be able to follow Idaho and West Virginia's lead as co-counsel this fall when they argue those cases for those laws at the United States Supreme Court. And while we care deeply, deeply about fair competition, and we want our girls to have the same level of competition as their brothers, we stand on the firm conviction when the law refuses to recognize biological differences, families will suffer. You see, it's easy to forget what it was like just 10 years ago. But that would be a grave mistake. And I want to remind you that truth is a liberating master, and it can't be submerged indefinitely without significant consequence. At ADF, we refer to what's called the virtuous cycle. We believe that we're all called to contend for truth and to play the long game, and that virtuous cycle means using every legal lever available to transform the law and the culture. We do it through legislative work, litigation, public advocacy, the building of alliance, realizing that we're the body of Christ. But it starts with the lawsuits that give life and voice to human stories. When people hear these stories and they see the victims, they're compelled to act and to do what's right. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years, sometimes it takes decades. But the impulse spurs policymakers and lawmakers to act. It spurs the executive branch when the opportunity arises to stand up. And it influences culture, and all work together. And that makes its way into the corporate boardrooms. Of course, we know the censorship and the discrimination that has gripped those boardrooms is starting to loosen. We've seen sweeping policy changes take place in a number of major Fortune 500 companies. This hasn't happened by happenstance. It's happened by hard work, by intention, by fortitude, and by divine providence. And in the gendered identity context, it seems so much now like law and culture are moving more towards the right direction. Consider the fact that 8 in 10 Americans now support ensuring that women have equal opportunities in sports. Or 7 out of 10 Americans now support laws protecting kids from medical mutilation, laws that actually many of you in this room were instrumental in passing and defending. It's a monumental shift. And we owe a special debt of gratitude to our state attorneys general, people who are here today, like our friend Steve Marshall in Alabama, as well as Jonathan Scrimetti from Tennessee. They've courageously helped to defend these child protection laws. And it resulted in a stunning Supreme Court victory this term, a victory that allows all states to protect children. And we're also grateful for the White House and the strong stand that they have taken in this season. The Scrimetti case was perhaps the capstone of tireless work by so many here, and a perfect picture of how the virtuous cycle works. The Alliance told the stories of detransitioners whose bodies were mangled and ravaged by medical malpractice. And in so doing, they had to rely on expert witnesses, those who would not only help identify the science, but have the courage to stand in court and be cross-examined. These were years in the making, but their testimonies demolished the idea that these experiments are somehow proven to help kids when they don't. The mountain of evidence may not have swayed the activists, but it continues to sway honest minds in unlikely places. You may have read people like Helen Lewis, a reporter from The Atlantic, who recently said these revelations made her more sympathetic to states against these experiments who are banning them. Even national reporting has been impacted, which makes it much easier for the next journalist to report the truth. And my hope is to hopefully stop parroting that silly lexicon from the AP that is really waging an ideological battle with the mandated use of pronouns and descriptors. G.K. Chesterton once said, "A dead thing can go with the stream, but only a living thing can go against it." These are the upstream battles that we must fight because they mark the souls of God's image bearers. And the progress we've made should absolutely encourage us. It should remind us that this side of eternity, no victory is final and no defeat is absolute. And we have every reason to contend for truth. And this fall, we will do so in the child's case at the Supreme Court. And we plan to fully capitalize on this progress. Colorado's made it illegal for counselors to help kids find peace with their bodies. It's an affront to children, to parents, to science, and to an assault on free speech. And over 20 states have similar laws. Imagine being unable to get the help that you need for your child, to have a counselor that aligns with your values to work through the situation. Ultimately, though, we know that laws like Colorado's, they are a tool of the enemy of our souls. This battle is not against people, it's against powers and principalities that people are being deceived. They're being deceived, and it's bringing grave harm to children and to families. It's separating them. And defeating this toxic ideology is a moral imperative. Tomorrow, you will hear from Kaylee Childs, the counselor in the case, about why she chose to enter the legal arena and the cost of doing so. But the hope in that is that it will charge us up the hill in every realm of influence that God has placed us in to stand for truth, because truth is the first casualty of tyranny. And yet the real cost that should break our heart is that it's always human. This is not about a cause. It is about the human soul and the damage that is being done. And so we cannot give up. We cannot give in. We must restrain this, and we must keep the doors open for the gospel, because it is the truth that sets men and women free. We also saw courage at work in so many other cases this term, including Medina, which we argued on behalf of South Carolina. But you know what? For 7 years, South Carolina's Governor McMaster courageously stood in the face of significant wind to stand for life and to stop Medicaid dollars from flowing to abortion providers. Without his stand, that case would not have happened. Without the lawmakers, it wouldn't have happened. And today, thanks to his courage, states are now free to defund the abortion industry, including Planned Parenthood, which received $3.2 billion in taxpayer funds over just a 5-year period, and is now the second largest provider of transgender drugs. We also saw great courage on behalf of parents, the parents who stood in the Mahmoud case that was litigated by our friends at Beckett. That ruling reinforces what we must make a constitutional norm, which is that the state can't use coercive tactics to undermine our faith. The government doesn't have the right to do that, whether it's in school or out. Children belong to their parents, and parents know best and love them most. On so many fronts this year, I hope you hear this, God has used this alliance, the people in this room, and some who aren't, to do abundantly more than we could ask or even imagine. And some will say that this is a vibe shift that we are experiencing. And many in this camp are quite bullish about it. Eric Kaufman declared in the Wall Street Journal that the progressive era is over. He said the decline of woke isn't merely a vibe shift, it marks the end of the 60-year rise of left liberalism in American culture. He says we are entering a post-progressive era. I hope that he's right, but I suspect that it might be a bit premature. And I'm also conscious that we don't really know what quite is ahead. The wins that we are celebrating are not rooted in a cultural war, they're rooted in a spiritual one. And so I do want to take us back to a sobering moment right now, because it's right that we celebrate these wins. But let's think about what they are. We're celebrating the fact that the Supreme Court ruled that actually parents have the right to get an opt-out from a curriculum that indoctrinates children, and they can still indoctrinate those children. We're celebrating the fact that we won't be using our taxpayer dollars to stop the killing of babies, but not that the babies cannot be killed. We're celebrating today, rightly so, because I can't imagine what would have happened had we not gotten this ruling, that states have the right to stop the mutilation of children. But we haven't got to the place yet where the mutilation cannot occur at all. When we think about these victories, we must recognize that these wins are beams of hope and light. They are very real progress, but that we are still existing and living in a world that is deeply tainted by darkness. So yes, I suspect there is a vibe shift. That vibe shift has resurfaced biological reality and has put cancel culture in retreat, and I am so glad. But that is not the end. It simply marks the beginning of what I hope to be a modern-day spiritual awakening against which we must realize that the enemy of our souls will fiercely fight, literally like hell, to make sure that he continues to have every inch of the territory gained. This is not over. But truth remains, and those who contend for it must trust God to continue to work in our midst. And the good news is that he is. Have you noticed the steady trickle of public conversions to Christianity? Or even figures like Joe Rogan, who was not yet a believer, but finds himself worlds apart from his previous skepticism, saying things like, we need Jesus, and attending church. In a moment, you're going to hear from Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a public intellectual who's had her own journey of faith. And there are many others, but it isn't just the intellectuals. We hear stirrings of a quiet revival among Gen Z, even in the UK, where one study says church attendance from those 18 to 24 have quadrupled since 2018. And according to the Wall Street Journal, Bible sales have spiked, driven largely by first-time buyers. Only God knows where this is going. I don't. But isn't it a glorious reminder that God writes the best stories, and that the story of the West is not certain? It is not yet finished. Because what if secularism, unmoored from objective truth, is running on its very last fume, about to give way to something new? In 1979, when John Paul II had just been elected, he went home to his native country in Poland. And for 30 years, the Soviet leadership there had done everything possible to uproot faith from the Polish people. And yet it was actually that hostility that deepened their spiritual hunger. Do you remember, for those who are old enough, when the Pope famously arrived in Warsaw? The massive crowd chanted in unison as if starving in the wilderness. We want God. We want God. That spiritual hunger, the divine longing, belongs in every human soul because it's put there by our Creator. And when they tell us not to believe our lying eyes about a man being a woman or a woman being a man, we may just begin to realize that there's some deception going on. And we may begin to ask, wait a minute, what other lies have I been told? God has given us an opening here, one that is ripe for spiritual and legal renewal, and I'm a whole lot more interested in the spiritual side. The spiritual side leads to the legal side. As the sexual revolution exhausts itself and as its refugees are fleeing in search of meaning, of purpose, and a sound basis for truth, the building blocks of a new consensus may well emerge. Let's be a part of it, because God is writing this story, and He's the same God who defeated death over 2,000 years ago, and the same Holy Spirit that came to earth is living in each one of us, just as it did in the early disciples. So as I close, I want to reiterate the 3 core attributes that anchor the work of our ADF team, because I want to know who you're with and remind you, for those who have been here before. Apart from God, we can do nothing. So we first and foremost must know Him. We must abide in Him. We must radiate His character. We need to be with Him. That's why we start our mornings the way we do here. Second, we have to do this work with joy and excellence. God is excellent. And then we have to do it in confidence that He will powerfully move to accomplish His purposes. That's what can give us joy. And lastly, we will walk into the wind with boldness, with courage, with resilience, and we will expect Him to produce astonishing results. And sometimes those results change a nation, and sometimes they change history. But may we be equally pleased when it simply touches one soul. We don't seek to win in the world's eyes. We seek to win in the Lord's. We aren't driven by denominations or political parties or the culture sway of the moment, but by unchanging truth. And we will not fit the world's stereotypes, because we are a people who will speak and act with solemn resolve, fierce courage, relentless joy, and love. And we will follow Matthew 22. We will love our God with all of our heart, our soul, and our mind, and love our neighbor as ourselves. So yes, we end where we began. Truth is a liberating master. When we contend for it, we serve humanity in the cause of liberation. As Jeremiah once prophesied, we point many to, once again, look for the ancient paths, where the good way is, so they may find rest for their souls.